G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Those of you who've been paying attention to my channel will be aware that for months I've been covering the antics of a man called Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby Joyce, my local elected member of parliament. Barnaby Joyce, leader of the National Party. Barnaby Joyce, acting Prime Minister of Australia. As of this morning, when Barnaby Joyce went to work, he was claiming to have the support of a united National Party who had decided to give him another chance because everything that had gone wrong in his political career in the last year has all been, quote, personal matters, and he was claiming that he hadn't done anything wrong. This afternoon, we heard differently. What happened this week is it's the sort of thing I want to claim a little bit of credit for. Why so? Well, you see, I've got a new feather on my hat, and that would probably be because hunters always stick a new feather on their hat when they claim a kill. And here's the way it works. On Monday, today's Thursday, right? On Monday, I rang up the ABC radio office in Tamworth, and I asked the question, how does it come to be that the Sydney Telegraph front page article detailing the exploits of Barnaby and his pregnant girlfriend, they say that he left his wife's family home in Tamworth when he was kicked out, when the wife became aware of his girlfriend before she was pregnant, and he set up house with the girlfriend in Canberra. And he's my elected representative in the electorate of New England, and Canberra's not in New England. So if Barnaby's living with his girlfriend in Canberra, does that mean that he's not living in my electorate, therefore he's not eligible? And ABC Radio Tamworth said, that's a very good question. As far as we know, he's showing up as having an address in Armidale, an apartment. And I asked them to check into it because I kind of suspected that perhaps a real estate developer or maybe a mining developer had provided the apartment. Well, okay, yesterday, Wednesday, the leader of the Labor Party in Australia, Australia's opposition leader, asked the question in Parliament, where's Barnaby living? How come he's in Armidale in an apartment, and who owns the apartment and how much rent's he paying? And the answer was, oh, Barnaby has a friend, a Mr. Maguire, who's a millionaire in Tamworth, who's a big wheel in politics in New England, and this Mr. Maguire, according to Barnaby, it's what he said to Parliament yesterday, Mr. Maguire rang Barnaby up and spontaneously offered to give him free tenure in an apartment in Armidale, valued $12,000 to date. And that's what Barnaby said. Therefore, he doesn't have to declare it because it's a friend of his and he didn't solicit for the apartment. However, by this morning, Mr. Maguire was being quoted in newspaper articles as saying, Barnaby rang me up and asked me to give him somewhere to live. Okay, that's where stuff stood at midday, at 1 o'clock and at 2 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, according to the ABC Radio News, the Senate had voted to censure Barnaby Joyce, agreeing in a vote that Barnaby Joyce was unfit to hold the position of Deputy Prime Minister of Australia and unfit to sit as Acting Prime Minister of Australia. And before the Senate had kind of finished sitting and before I heard it on the radio, Malcolm Turnbull, the Australian Liberal Coalition Prime Minister, had suddenly announced an impromptu doorstop interview where he said that because of the incalculable hurt that Barnaby Joyce had inflicted on 6 women, to wit, his wife, his 4 daughters, and his current pregnant partner, Barnaby Joyce would be standing down next week. Barnaby Joyce will not be functioning as acting Prime Minister. Not only, but also henceforth and forevermore, it is against Australian law for any parliamentarian to have any sexual relationship with any member of said parliamentarian's office staff. So I think you'll find that between what the Senate has voted on and what the Prime Minister has said, The National Party has been given marching orders that despite the fact that they haven't got anybody else who is better than Barnaby, the best that they have to offer is a sleazy, low-hound, adulterous scumbag, they're going to have to depose him as their party leader and come up with somebody else to be the acting Prime Minister and leader of the National Party. That's where things stand as at now. What's that? 3 minutes to 6? Let's see what the radio says. An hour after I heard the news.
A new ban, an extraordinary announcement from the Prime Minister this afternoon. After saying it wasn't a particularly good idea, he's announced that he's banning sex between ministers and their staff, and he's updating the Ministerial Code of Conduct to reflect his decision. He talks a lot in his statement about women and respect and bringing it up to the standard of 2018. The other big news today is that Barnaby Joyce will not be acting Prime Minister next week when the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, is away. Matthias Cormann will be acting Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce is effectively being benched and he's taking some leave. He's not leaving his job, but he's taking some leave. I'll be joined by Shadow Attorney General Mark Dreyfus to find out what Labor thinks of all of that. We will talk about that Florida high school shooting as well. It's all coming up on our Drive right after the ABC News. With ABC News, the Prime Minister has banned ministers from having sexual relationships with staffers in the wake of the Barnaby Joyce affair. Stephen Jedgetts reports from Parliament House.
The Deputy Prime Minister has faced days of damaging headlines about his relationship with a former staffer who's now pregnant with his child. Malcolm Turnbull has publicly scolded Mr Joyce for his behaviour, saying he made a shocking error of judgment, hurting his wife and daughters.
He has set off a world of woe.
And he says the current ministerial standards need to be updated so ministers can't have sex with their staffers.
I don't care whether they are married or single. They must not have sexual relations with their staff.
Mr Joyce is taking leave next week, so he won't be acting Prime Minister while Mr Turnbull is overseas.
The former Commentaro's Barkeeper Smikari.
See? I told you. I told you. I told you so.
Hi there, I'm Patricia Carvelis and this is RN Drive. An extraordinary announcement from the Prime Minister this afternoon. He's banning sex between ministers and their staff and he's updated the Ministerial Code of Conduct to reflect his decision.
So as you will see, I've today added to these standards a very clear and unequivocal provision. Ministers, regardless of whether they are married or single, must not engage in sexual relations with their staff.
He's also appointed Finance Minister Matthias Cormann as acting Prime Minister next week, while embattled Deputy PM and Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce takes a week of leave. You'll be hearing from Shadow Attorney General Mark Dreyfus about that and the rest of the day in federal politics. We'll also be crossing to Florida, where this affair with a staffer has resulted in a near-death experience for the Nationals leader, a new set of rules for ministers and a withering moral assessment from the Prime Minister.
We must recognise that whatever may have been acceptable or to which a blind eye was turned in the past, today, in 2018, it is not acceptable for a minister to have a sexual relationship with somebody who works for them.
Barnaby Joyce is taking leave next week, meaning he won't take charge of the country while Malcolm Turnbull is in the United States. Mark Dreyfus is the Shadow Attorney General. Mark Dreyfus, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Patricia.
What a day. Strong language from the Prime Minister on the moral side of this story and a new Ministerial Code of Conduct. Do you support it?
Well, look, it's clear that the Prime Minister has lost all confidence in his deputy, but he's refusing to do the right thing and sack him. And frankly, this is not about Barnaby's private life. It's about his use of taxpayers' money and his use of his ministerial office. And if Mr Turnbull doesn't get that, he's living on another planet. We haven't seen what he's going to do with his ministerial standards, but he wrote the current statement of ministerial standards It's absolutely clear that Barnaby Joyce is already in breach of them, and it's simply a demonstration, yet another, of Mr Turnbull's extraordinary weakness that he's not sacking him right now.
Okay, you said Barnaby Joyce is in breach of the ministerial standards. This woman who is now having his child is his partner. How is he in breach now? Of course, if they're retrospective, he would be in breach, but they're not.
No. The ministerial standards have been in place, signed by Malcolm Turnbull since the start of his prime ministership. And right now, it's whatever changes Mr Turnbull's saying he wants to make to them, it's absolutely clear that in relation to the allocation of a job, allocation of staff, which Mr Joyce, as Deputy Prime Minister, personally oversaw, where he had a conflict of interest, he's in breach of the standards. He's also in breach of the standards by having sought or encouraged a gift of rent-free accommodation worth somewhere around $12,000 or $14,000 in Armidale, which he tried to conceal for a time. That's another breach of the ministerial standards. I'm up to 3 so far, and he's misled the House. That's 4. Getting to another, he's allowed agencies, now let me finish because you've asked about breaches, he's allowed government agencies to use taxpayers' money to pay to his apparently close friend, wealthy businessman Greg Maguire, who owns a hotel in Armidale where a taxpayer-funded function was held. Now, how much more does the Prime Minister need?
Okay, going back to misleading the House, has he misled the House on?
Reports earlier in the week had Mr Maguire saying that Barnaby Joyce called him up and asked him for a place to stay. He told that to 2 journalists before this became the issue that it is today. Today, Barnaby Joyce is saying absolutely the opposite, saying that Mr Maguire rang him. Now, I'm preparing to accept Mr Maguire's word on this, and on that basis I'll say that the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia has misled the House.
Okay, it's not clear if he's misled the House. Journalists have contacted Mr Maguire. He hasn't yet clarified exactly what the discrepancy
but we
is.
do know
Doesn't tell the truth.
We absolutely know. Going back to the Prime
You've already been
Minister's
quoted.
position, he's ignoring his own statement of ministerial standards, the one that he signed off on. Not only is the Deputy Prime Minister's integrity in tatters, the Prime Minister's integrity is in tatters. And it's absolutely clear, after a couple of weeks of this, that the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, by his conduct, has fallen below the standards that Australians expect of their Deputy Prime Minister. He's no longer even Deputy Prime Minister except in name, because he's been forced by the Prime Minister to take leave, given some kind of leave pass, but he's not fit to be acting Prime Minister next week while the Prime Minister's away. Why is he fit to be Deputy Prime Minister?
On the ministerial code, should ministers be banned from having sexual relationships with their staffers?
I was asked about this for the first time last week by Fran Kelly, who only alerted me to some US legislation that's been passed by the House of Reps in the Congress, but not yet by the Senate of the United States. And I've been thinking about it since. What I said then was that sex in the office always presents problems, but it's very difficult to set or legislate rules for personal relationships. So I'll have a look at the words of the Prime Minister wants to put in his ministerial code, but I haven't really changed my mind. It's a very difficult thing to legislate for. That's what the Prime Minister said a week ago. That's what Julie Bishop said. It's pretty difficult to legislate for, and that's why you have to go back to principle. The standards already require ministers. I'll read out a bit of them. This is not the reworded one. This is now. The standards already require ministers to demonstrate appropriately high standards of personal integrity. The standards already require ministers, and I'll read another bit, to ensure that their conduct in office is in fact and in appearance in accordance with these standards. On any view, the Deputy Prime Minister has fallen below the current standards, and the Prime Minister ought to sack him now. I fear that this is...
I agree. Barnaby Joyce should be sacked right now, but what's happening is nobody wants to do it from the Liberal side, and therefore they're waiting for the National Party to do it, and the National Party have already admitted they've got nobody to replace him, so they're trying to drag it out in the hope that it'll all go away. And the fact is, Barnaby Joyce has just destroyed the coalition government. Barnaby Joyce and his little head ruling his big head has destroyed the Liberal National Coalition and probably buried the National Party forever. Warbles not a lot to YouTube. Ciao.